Evening, everyone. We'll get started if we're all ready and happy in the heat. Right. Good evening. I'm Councillor Grace Cooch, the Vice Chairman of the Climate Transition Corporate and Environmental Services Policy Advisory Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? I ask this so that people in the meeting will know if this will be happening. No. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and the members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. We've chosen to continue as well, even though it's rather warm. I assume everyone's happy with that, and we'll just try and get through this one quickly. Cool. So item number one, are there any apologies? I've got apologies already from Councillor Higson and Jones. Anything else? Are there any substitute members? Number three, there are no urgent items. Item number four, are there any visiting members? Item five, are there any disclosures by members or officers? No. Item six, are there any disclosures of lobbying? Thank you. So item seven, I move that all items be taken in public. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item eight, are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of June 2025? No. Thank you. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on 3rd of June 2025 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 9, are there any comments on the forward plan, or do the Cabinet members wish to make any comments?
No comment from me.
Thank you. So I move that the forward plan be noted. Is that agreed? Thank you. So we move on to item 10, the fourth quarter risk update, which is going to be introduced by Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is an update and it's to be noted. So updates to the Corporate Risk Register are now being reported as a standalone item in order to ensure due consideration is given to risk. And I wanted to emphasise that operational risks are still being captured, but we wanted to actually capture corporate risks very much in their own category to make sure they were given due consideration, as I said. A review of the Council's corporate risks was carried out with Cabinet and wider leadership team in May 25. And that was facilitated by consultants Barnett Waddingham. Just for a bit of background on them, they're actuarial and risk consultants. They do a lot in the financial services sector, and they're also the consultants to KCC for the pension fund. So that work has resulted in an updated corporate risk register summarised on page 31. I wanted to thank Uchi, who's online, as we have her on our screens, for your excellent work, Uchi, on this. And also you're here for any detail that's required that the committee wants to get into. So corporate risks are as described in detail in Appendix A, starting on page 24. The risk of cyber attack is the top risk, followed by rising temporary accommodation costs and local government reorganisation. Mitigations are in place for these and for other risks, as described also in Appendix A. And the risk workshop helped to identify emerging risks and external threats beyond the existing identified corporate risks. And these are described on page 23 as horizon scanning, so they're interesting to read also. Recommendations, you're asked to note the risk update. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. I have to apologise because this is the first time I've seen the paper copies. I had a quick skim on the internet, but not the easiest items to to get from there. But on page 21, where you've listed, if you like, dozen corporate risks, I suppose my concern is question is that even when we've done the mitigation, the top half dozen, so half of them still remain are still red. Red's pretty well. It's obviously with our system of traffic lights, black is the worst, but red is it's sort of normally seen as sort of stop. And the top three in particular still remain pretty high, scoring 16 or 15 for local government reorganisation. And then when we look at the at number 4, which is climate-related impact, even with the mitigation, it hasn't changed. It's still at 16, which is really significant. So I just wondered, I suppose, what's your thought, Kathy, and what perhaps the officers are in terms of the fact that even with the mitigation we've managed to identify so far, those half of these risks still remain really, quite a high likelihood of them actually happening in some description or not. And is there anything further we can do as a council, or potentially some of these possibly lobby other organisations, which may bring these risks down further? Because I say I'm concerned to see 3 of them remaining at red after the mitigation, and I say the top 3 only moving down to red. It sort of, to me, it sort of flashes up as real sort of not crisis, but a potentially big crisis. Because if these all were to happen to us, we would be up the proverbials, I would have thought.
Would you like me to come?
Oh, Uchi, do you want me just to start and then I'll ask you to come in if that's okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Councillor Harper, in that, we do have some risks on here that remain as red. And arguably, those are ones that are sort of like in the majority outside of our control. But you're right, we should be looking at all mitigants we can. So for cyber attack, if you remember in May 25, we were in the midst of the M&S cyber attack, which pretty much, shut down that organisation. And I think it's sort of taken a number of weeks for them to start, trading at a reasonable level again. We talked very much about how long it takes for confidence to return to the customer base when something like that happens. So our team here are doing a lot on cyber, but you're always chasing a target where the situation, may change. The people who are sort of carrying out these attacks may actually have a new technique. So we felt that needed to remain a high risk. And Uchi, we should definitely go into the detail in a second. Same as temporary accommodation costs, they continue to rise. And when we see numbers sort of like as we work through the MTFS and budget process, we'll see the scale of that. The mitigation is house building at as fast a rate as we can, but for the moment, because there's a time lag for that to come online, the risk still remains, and the cost of that particularly. And local government reorganisation, again, in May, where were we? Would we feel more confident today? Yeah, debatable, but this was as at that point in time. So thank you. Uchi, I'll hand over to you if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. No, absolutely right. These are really, and part of the reason why we've put these on our corporate risk register and bring them out to be reviewed regularly and looked at is because we understand how they are really our top risks, and it's around the likelihood of them occurring and the potential impacts that they will have. And as you rightly mentioned, cyber attack, for instance, is a top risk, global risk. Actually, people have rated it really as top for a few years in a row now. And one of the key things why it's a really big one for us as well is that public service organizations, NHS, the councils are really big targets for this. But as Councillor Cox mentioned, there are quite a number of things that we've put in place and we continue to put in place for the exercises that we organize every year. Staff are constantly rehearsing and updating their plans and doing all of those things. So we have assess these risks following those mitigations and still place them on red because we understand that they're still big. And a lot of the time we think it's not a question for cyber, for instance, it's not a question of if it will happen. Sometimes it's when, because of the frequency with which it's happening. So we still want to maintain them as very high risk and continue to do everything that we can to ensure that we bring them down if we can. And these are reviewed quarterly. So as we implement additional controls and put measures in place, we'll review them every quarter to see if they should come down or not. But yeah, I agree with everything you've said, Councillor Cox.
Thank you both for that. I suppose, I mean, one of the ones which is actually on page 32, which is the last of these, which is the one around, ironic for tonight, but biodiversity, climate change and adaptation objectives. And it was at our last meeting we agreed the new biodiversity policy and climate change policies. And I know within those there's a lot of... Sorry. Oh, is that better? Sorry. Yeah, in the two policies we agreed there was a lot of really good stuff there, and I can remember we asked the officers if they could go away and sort of prioritise which items we can do, if you like, in the next year, 2 years. Well, you know, we've got the ability to, I suppose, spend money to actually deliver some of these. I suppose I was just wondering, given all of that, wouldn't we think that might help, you know, reduce the mitigation? I mean, obviously, whole issues beyond our control, but in terms of our own little patch of what we're doing within the borough, I would have thought if we could push ahead with things like, you know, some of the wetland restoration, doing some of the improving of sort of woodland planting and so on in our own parks and all the rest of it in the next year or so, that actually might start to have an impact. And even the sort of lollipops on the trees outside here, which, you know, and green walls should all are things perhaps, you know, we could look at, which would all just help possibly bring that down by, you know, having an impact. If not, yeah, I don't know. I suppose worried to see that despite everything we're doing, it sort of still remains almost completely outside our control.
Yeah, and you're right, Councillor Harper. We're sitting here today. I had to drive out today down to Headcorn, and the temperature on my car didn't change from 35.5 to 36. That was the range it was in, and we've got, you know, Europe sitting in temperatures of 46. So it's right. It's up here as a one of the top priorities, and there's the 200 item action plan. For both sort of climate adaptation and also biodiversity that we're pressing on with pace. I think when those actions start getting sort of ticked off and completed, then we'll see the mitigated risk score come down. But until that happens, I think it would be premature to actually start sort of like almost sort of counting our chickens, because we haven't yet sort of like hatched as many as we need to. But the reality is we do need to. You know, temperatures like this puts pressures, as we know, on the NHS. It puts pressures on people's health, especially more vulnerable, and that sort of becomes a societal issue. So it is an important one, and apologies I didn't respond to it before. Thank you.
Just before I invite any other members to speak, I think we might just need to move microphones slightly closer because we're competing with the sound of the aircon units, is my guess. I don't know. Would any other members like to speak on this item? No? Okay. Are we happy to agree the recommendation on page 13 that the risk update attached in Appendix 1 be noted? Is that okay? Thank you. We are moving on to, is my thing in the right order? Item 13, Council Tax Reduction Scheme, also to be introduced by Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Just making sure I've got the right paper here. Right, so So the council tax reduction scheme has been in place since 2013 and it relates to people on low incomes. We have Officer Zoe with us today who can obviously go into more detail as we need. The total cost for Maidstone is just under 12 million per annum for this scheme, with most of the cost being borne by the major preceptors. So that is KCC. You can see the details of this, I think, on table 2.4, but it's KCC, NBC, Kent Fire and Rescue and Kent Police, who are the major preceptors. The majority of the cost goes to KCC. I think it's 71.3%. The report proposes a consultation on changes to the reduction scheme for 26-27, and particularly whether to extend to a maximum discount depending on the circumstances of the individual. It also proposes an adjustment to the banding system between bands 2 and 5, which I'll ask Officer Zoe Kent to talk about a little bit in a minute, just so you don't have to listen to me too long. The current scheme gives a maximum discount of 80% on council tax, meaning that qualifying claimants pay just 20%. And that really relates to those under real and deep financial pressure. What's interesting, though, the cost to collect that 20%, which we're required to do, actually can somehow completely negate the value of the 20% being there. So you do a lot of work, you know, put people through the process of understanding what their financial circumstances are, which obviously we need to do. But actually, if it ends up with no particular result to the council, then it's an opportunity to rethink that. So the consultation will therefore propose a higher rate of support, either 90 or 100% discount. Interestingly, if you look, as I've done, and the officers obviously know, across other councils in Kent, the minimum discount that's given is 80 and the maximum is 100. And you can, it's quite interesting when you sort of do look at the spread of which council is which of those. The net result to the council of this additional support, taking account of a reduction in uncollectible debts and also the cost to collect, is estimated at 136,000 per annum. It's also produced that higher relief is payable for those who are not eligible for the maximum relief, as set out in table 6 on page 41. So Zoe, would you like to add any more to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Yes, I can explain the different bands. So, as Councillor Cox has said, for those that aren't working, this is all working age. Pensioner age get up to a maximum of 100% support based on their income. For working age, we currently award a maximum of 80% for people that aren't working. For those that are working, there's a sliding scale and there's bands. We currently have band 2 at 65%, and then the bands drop down at 50, 25% and 10%. And so what we're suggesting is that we consult on increasing all the bands to 75%, 60%, 35% and 20%. And you can see in table 6, and there's an example in 3.3 of the report, that people aren't earning very much and they actually don't get so much help towards their council tax. So the example is band 2 earnings would be between a penny and £110.43, put somebody into band 2. For somebody in band 2, there's a maximum award of 65%, and then so we'd propose that that would go to 75%.
Thank you, Councillor Cox and Zoe. I've got Councillor Forecast first.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, thank you, Zoe and Mark, for meeting me earlier to discuss this, but I still have some further questions, if that's okay. I'm still not entirely sure why we're not sticking with the current scheme at the current rate. And I do completely appreciate we should be supporting the less well-off in society, but I do have concerns that this is in effect a council tax for those who are not working, while those who are working and don't qualify for this scheme everyday people are getting no support. Can you clarify that?
Would you like me to answer that, Councillor Cox?
Happy for you to.
Thank you for the question. So we have to have limits, and we do a lot of work around where we should set the bands. We put the bands up for earnings by the consumer inflation rates on an annual basis, and we look at the DWP, the Department for Work and Pension, their benefit levels before we move them. So they're always, with tax credits, with any benefits, there's a level on earnings of when you get help and when you don't, and that goes down to child benefit and everything now as to whether you're supported or not supported. I think we pick up as many people as we can. Most people who are working that are on a low income also get a small amount of universal credit now, and so we get information through from universal credit. As soon as we receive that, we look whether they're entitled to any support. So those people that are on a low income, we are trying to give them support. On the whether we should stick at 80%, East Kent, that's Canterbury, Dover and Thanet, all have 90% schemes, and the rest of the county apart from Folkestone are on 80%. And it's whether looking, we're trying to see whether providing more support for council tax will give those on low incomes across the borough of Maidstone more income to pay towards their utilities and other bills and food, etc.
Thank you. So, and I think it's helpful for me to understand sort of the rationale behind it, and I think you've explained that well. But I am still uneasy. I mean, it's true, isn't it, that this is a council tax cut for people who are not working, and other than bringing it in line with Thanet and Canterbury, is there a particular reason we're deciding to do that?
Would you like me to come in first? So
yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So part of the report covers that we've had the administration grants we've been given by the major preceptors since 2013, and this has been an agreement across the county that they would fund towards the collection of council tax and the administration of the schemes. Those grants were withdrawn from the 1st of April 2025. A paper was put forward on behalf of all the districts explaining why we needed that support. So we're now currently unsupported in managing the scheme, and so that is one of the reasons for suggesting the change that we've put forward. So the actual cost on managing this scheme is now completely down to the district authorities, and in our case to Maidstone. This isn't about mirroring the East Kent authorities. This is looking at what's right for the Maidstone area, but also looking at our partners across Kent to see what they're doing as well. We have been looking at that. Bands 2 to 5 cover those people that are in work. So it's not all about supporting those that are out of work. It's supporting those in low income. And, you know, there are schemes working with the Department for Work and Pensions through the job centre to try to get people within the Maidstone area back into work again. Thank you.
I'll bring in Councillor English and then Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. The headline figure, yes, if you look at it, would say that this was a significant cost to Maidstone Borough Council, but clearly there are some moving parts here. Zoe's referred to the withdrawal of the supporting the administration grant we received. You also have to bear in mind is that as inflation goes up, if the bandings aren't adjusted and if other changes aren't made, it becomes increasingly difficult for people to pay the council tax. So the arrears amount could actually significantly increase. What we see there is that what we see here are figures based on current arrears amounts and modest projections. But if that were to significantly increase, and that is very possible, it could significantly increase, the gap would continue to close. So what we are minded about is that circumstances have changed, and in changed circumstances, you may amend your policy. That's the point of the consultation. But obviously, we're having a consultation, so it may or may not end up that way. And we have an opportunity to encourage people in Maidstone by trying to remove an effective disincentive to seek employment. I'm sure that we all want people to actually be incentivised to go out and seek employment. At the moment, the way the system works, it actually doesn't encourage people on low incomes. So it could actually be seen to be doing exactly the opposite, and people can get easily caught in that trap where it's actually probably better not to earn any money. So we want to actually, as a local authority, not leave people trapped in that situation if we can avoid it. And hopefully over time they will end up not needing any help as their income hopefully will improve.
Thank you. I think it's really important when we look at papers like this, first of all, to remember that, and I think we are remembering that we've got real people, real residents who are under, who are affected by what we're discussing here. And I'm really glad the consultation will go out. But I think it's also really important we don't get bogged down on percentages. You know, percentages of a small number, it may be a small percentage, a high percentage, it doesn't actually mean anything. What you need to do is to look at the pound amount. And when we look at 2.10, that describes a couple under 25 on universal credit will receive £400.14 a month, and a single claimant £316.98 a month. Now, I don't know how anybody actually just manages to live, to move around, transport, food, you know, basic clothing, the odd bump in the road when the car, or you probably haven't even got a car, needs fixing, or the kids need new shoes, how they manage to do that on that amount of money. And I think, you know, this type of concession is really important, because if people fall behind with their rent, what we know is going to happen is they're most likely going to fall into needing temporary accommodation. So let's be really careful, I think, of what the unintended consequences of asking people for money that they don't have. I did a lot of work up until I became a councillor with Kent's Credit Union, and it successfully merged that into Wave Community Bank. You'll see their adverts going up and down on the buses, where we dealt with some of the people in the county who were really in the worst situation. So this is one that I'm really quite passionate about, that we do a lot to help those people to make ends meet and play our part. Thank you.
Can I move to Councillor Cannon and then Councillor Harper, and then we'll bring it back round if necessary.
Thank you. If I could just ask some little points of clarity on the report, and then I'll share opinion and that sort of thing. So what's non-passported in table 6? What does non-passported mean? And then also the earnings brackets, is that gross before? I mean, I know only at the end there might be taxation, but is it that gross earnings, or is it sort of after tax and NI and that sort of thing on the bands where people are actually working?
Sorry, what was the first question? I started thinking about the earnings, and I didn't write it down. Sorry.
The first question is non-passported.
Oh, yep, yeah. Yes, of course. So that will be removed shortly by the scheme in April 2026. Will remove that, because there'll be no more income support, job seekers allowance, or employment and support allowance. So that means you're on a benefit that automatically gives you a right to other benefits. Non-passported means that your income is all taken into account. So in the past, when you were on income support or job seekers allowance, we as a local authority wouldn't look at any other income. now that people are on universal credit, we get all the information through, and that comes through into our calculation. So it's dealt with a little bit differently. And just so that you're aware, we've got really, really low numbers now of people that aren't on universal credit and that are left on other benefits. By the end of September, it should be down to a handful of people that haven't been moved over for a reason. And for the earnings, I will have to come back to you on that. I'd like to say that I know that, but I have a feeling that that will be net earnings, I'm guessing. But I will have to check. I know when we calculate earnings, we take the national insurance off it, the tax off it, and people are allowed half of their pension contributions come off it. So for that reason, I think it will be net.
Thank you for that. That provides a bit of clarity because I wasn't sure. So in terms of the opinion, I sort of echo the comments made by Stan on the 80%. I don't really feel that should change. It'd be interesting to see what the consultation says. I mean, if anything did change, I'm more minded that it changed further up the bracket because band 1 isn't working, whereas someone in band 6, they're only, this is why I asked about gross and net, is they're either earning between 12k or 17k a year is my quick calculation, and possibly have 3 children. So they're really trying to do the right thing. You know, they're working 17k is a lot of hours each year, you know, that they're working, and they're only getting a 10% rate. So in all honesty, I would freeze the 80%, and I would want to see more action with the people who are working in bands 4, 5, and 6. And I know the report highlights that it is about encouraging those on universal credit to work, but I do feel that, like, I don't know how you get that balance, because clearly there's a tapering here, and there's a positive idea of increasing 65 and 75 to try and improve the taper so it's not so dramatic. But then, you know, I don't see how putting band 1 up to 90 or 100% is a good thing. I mean, I in terms of, you know, the report clearly states it's about motivating people to do things. So I would suggest 80 stays, and then you work on the further bands where the gap is sort of, because, you know, that's quite dramatic between the earnings don't go up massively between band 3 and band 4. And I know that the proposal is changing bands 2 and band 3, but actually it's those 3, 4, 5, 6 that sort of probably need more focus, but maybe that's very expensive. But that would be my view, and I wouldn't necessarily want to see the band 1 changed from 80%. Because also, I mean, bearing in mind, is it on page 38, it does say, in effect, this is all paid for by other council taxpayers. So I think if we're all paying for this scheme, then we want to get the best bang from our buck and get people working again. And this could be part of that story.
Can I bring Councillor Harper in and then come back on both sets of comments? Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the first thing I was going to do was move the recommendation, I'll find it now, on page 35, which is we consult on making changes to the council tax reduction scheme for 2026-28. I must admit, when I tried to read this on the internet, I came to a completely different view to which I have done now, because I can see table 4 quite clearly, and it shows, doesn't it, the net save or the net cost to us of moving, say, to 90% from the current 80%. I mean, it's £57,000, and if we go up to 100%, it's £136,000. But I think we need to think, as Kathy, the cabinet member, pointed out, on the figures on paragraph 2.10. Just to explain, I actually work for a welfare benefits charity who advises people, I mean, albeit in Islington, of how they can maximise their benefits in a situation where poverty in this country is growing, and we only have to, unfortunately, look at what's going on in Parliament today to see you know, some of the real impacts in terms of figures on people. So I think if there's anything we can do to actually help the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society, then I think we should do. Because I think Kathy's really correct. When we look at 2.10, if that's the type of income you're receiving, you're reliant on a food bank, you're reliant on various other sources of charity. What you don't get from the food bank, you'll be buying the cheapest food you can, which will probably give you health problems later. Your kids will be, you know, disadvantaged in terms of not being able to join sports clubs and so on because you just do not have the money. Now, whilst the impact of this, you know, in the bigger scheme of things, isn't that significant, but for some of these 9,713 people, I mean, it could really be the difference between sort of struggling and just about making things meet, as opposed to living in complete desperation, waking up not knowing how you're going to make ends meet that day. So anything we can do as a council, and frankly, for the cost of 136,000 quid, we went to 100%, the benefit to those people would really just outweigh that small cost to us as a council. I mean, I would like to see us go further, but clearly there are limits on what we can do with the law and all the rest of it. But I would definitely hope that we can go out to consultation, talk to some of the people like Citizens Advice and try to contact some of these people who obviously would be the most impacted by it, and get some real further stories of how, if we do this, it will, as I say, make that little bit of difference to people's sanity in their lives, so that when it comes back, we're better informed, and perhaps the 100% will just jump out at us. You know, it's such an obvious thing to do. So as I say, I came in until I saw this, that table in particular, thinking possibly the other way around, but now I'm just heavily convinced that this is the right thing to do. It's, you know, it's one of the small things we can do as a council to help address the problems the poorest in our society finds. And I think it's, you know, beholden on us, at least at this stage, to do the consultation. And then ideally, if we can get the right information from that, you know, the evidence, push ahead with it. But anyway, at this stage, I say I'm moving that we go out to do or recommend to Councillor Cox that we do the consultation. Thank you, Jim.
I'll bring Councillor Cox back in on both those points, and then Councillor Forecast.
Thank you. I just wanted to also make the point that 136,000 is 0.68% of what we collect council tax altogether. Now, if we start changing some of the allowances in different bands, it's not a flat line analysis. You can't just take a saving from one of the bands and move it to another, because the quantum of those bands differs. This is about, as Councillor Harper was saying, taking the most disadvantaged group of people that we have within the borough who qualify under that band and giving them a little bit of extra hand. And I would just say, if you're not sure about this, try living on that £400 a month and paying your council tax and seeing how that feels, because that's the reality of the people it's going to be helping.
Councillor Forecast and then Councillor English. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. Unless I'm missing the point, how does a reduction in someone's council tax bill encourage them back into work, considering band 1? Just a question. Then, so my understanding is it's the viewpoint for you guys that the change in economic circumstances means the 80% scheme is no longer considered sufficient to support, but that change in economic circumstances is still felt by thousands and thousands of residents in Maidstone who don't get any council tax reduction scheme and yet are being asked to foot the increased bill to pay for this. And that is just not fair.
I was going to say Councillor English and then Councillor Cox and then Councillor Sweetman, unless you want to take both questions.
I will leave my colleagues to answer that question, but I would say that fundamentally, whatever scheme we have, the important thing is that we have a scheme that is going to work. And there is no point, however one has the figures and the notional numbers, in having a scheme that effectively risks pushing large numbers of people into arrears and therefore almost falls over and therefore requires a large amount of an increasing amount of collection costs, which we are no longer getting subsidised. So we've got to be aware that whatever we do, whatever the morality, whatever the circumstances, we need a scheme that will work and is administratively as simple as is possible. So that's one thing. The second thing is we do need to be aware that council tax costs and people being ended up in the magistrates' court for non-payment of council tax and possibly ending up therefore not paying their utility bills or their rent or whatever, could end up with them being made homeless, and we'd end up with other knock-on effects elsewhere in the council's business in terms of temporary accommodation or other costs. So it's not as if this is entirely in isolation. There are other contextual things around it. That's all I would say. And so it's from a pragmatic point of view, one has to think, yeah, what are the potential opportunity costs if I don't do this? It looks like, yeah, we could have a little bit of a saving, 57,000 on the 90%, maybe less if the inflation rate goes up or arrears go higher. But we could end up with some collateral damage down the track and higher costs elsewhere in the council's business or to other organisations. So we've got to be careful about practical effects, leaving aside the morality of things.
Councillor Cox, did you want to come back in now? Or?
Yeah, I was actually just looking for some notes from a conference that I was at in Birmingham last week, where we heard a health board official, senior lady, talking about how the active working age and working ability age in men has reduced dramatically over the last 5 years. And so I just wanted to make it clear, you know, some people who aren't in work aren't doing that, avoiding work. It's they're not able to work. And actually also when you're on this level of income, one thing happens as a surprise in your life, you know, suddenly as I say, it's time to buy the kids' school uniform. You now can't afford next month's rent. That's the reality. So you're already in arrears, and this is a priority debt. Council tax is a priority debt in this sort of like the waterfall of which ones you pay first, as is your rent, as are your utilities. You're already in trouble. This is trying to sort of like recognise what the profile of the people who are in this band. It doesn't mean that other bands, you know, things go wrong for other people in other bands, you know, washing machines break, a car needs new tyres. If you're in hardship, we've got a scheme to basically capture that and make adjustments for that. But this is recognising the profile of this band in particular. Thank you.
I'll bring Councillor Sweetman in briefly, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to say there's on the side to people that are not working. It's not necessarily their choice. There's people that've had to give up work to look after relatives. There's husbands that've had to give up work to look after their sick wives, or vice versa. And then they find themselves in that position and they can't work. So we should be supporting them, because they want to work but they can't, because they're doing what they need to do. They're looking after a sick partner or terminally ill.
At this stage, I was going to suggest that we take it to a vote. I'm happy to propose, and Councillor Harper was happy to propose also. Which question was that? Thank you.
Sorry, I don't mean to intrude, but no one's disputing that these people struggle and for whatever circumstance, and they deserve our help. But it was said that by given a greater reduction in council tax from 80 to 90 or 80 to 100, that would encourage people who don't work back into work. But nobody said how that's going to happen.
Shall I come back on that?
Yes, please.
So I don't think we've said it will encourage those people back into work. I think giving support to people in work encourages people to work. This is about helping people, and part of the report covers how much council tax, the cost of council tax has increased since 2013 when the scheme first came in, and people are having to pay so much more towards this council tax. So the report is suggesting that people now need more help than perhaps they did in 2013-14. If what we could do, because this is all about consulting, this isn't about actually changing the scheme, we could, if it's felt that we should consider people that are working, that they need perhaps more support, then we can consult on. I've suggested consult on increasing the bands by 10%. We could say 10% or 20%, and I can model that during the consultation period, and I can bring that back, and we can look after the consultation. You can look at all the results and decide where you want to give more help. But it comes down to, as has been suggested, there's a fine line on the bands and how much support we give, so that we don't increase the cost too much. But that, you know, they're all options, and it's all about supporting those on the lowest income, and it's working with the job centre to get people back into work.
Councillor Harper.
Having moved the recommendation, just like to come back before hopefully we move to the vote. I think this is not just about the argument of getting people into work. This is about the argument of morality and the ability of the community to help its poorest members. There's opportunity costs which may be saved if we go ahead with this. For instance, the NHS is likely to save on mental health. People living at this level of poverty and deprivation are well known to have very significant mental health problems. As I said earlier, I work for a welfare benefits charity. Most of our people referred to us come with mental health issues. They're referred either by the NHS or various other advisory organisations. But it is well known that people at the very bottom, in terms of money, suffer disproportionately in terms of mental health. So, for instance, if you're looking at, you know, hard figures, this will help reduce the NHS mental health costs in Maidstone doing it. Another thing, we only have to look, unfortunately, and we talked about food banks, the increase in shoplifting going on in our society now is, you know, is increasing at the time when poverty is increasing. And there's a direct correlation between the two. You cannot, if people can't afford to buy anything because they just have no money at the end of the second week, and there's 2 more weeks before they get their next benefits, shoplifting, I wouldn't condone it at all, but it inevitably is the type of thing people look at. So there are massive opportunity costs with this. I really think it's a moral thing, and yes, it will help some people, and it may make the difference for some people between being able to go into paid work at some level as within the universal credit regime and not. But if we do nothing, we're not going to help anybody. So that's really what I think. I personally view this much more as a moral thing, the community helping its poorest. Anyway, that's the basis I've moved it on.
Councillor Cannon.
Just briefly, I was glad to hear what Zoe said about modelling the ban changes further up in the consultation. And as it is a consultation, I won't sort of talk much more other than if we have to change the recommendation to make sure that those bans are, that modelling that Zoe mentioned is put into the consultation. That's what I'd like to see. So I don't know, is a recommendation required to do that, or do we just rely on? Okay.
So as Councillor Harper's already put forward that he's happy to propose the recommendation in the report, I'll ask first if there's a seconder for that and if we want to vote on it. Equally, Councillor Harper, if you do want to make any amendments to that motion in light of that discussion, let us know.
I think I'd like to go out and consult on what we've got here. It's been worked up. People during the consultation can feed more information back if they wish to, and obviously that would be analysed, but I think I would keep it fairly simple, go out on what we've got here.
Councillor English?
I think what Councillor Cannon is referring to is paragraph 2.16. It is also proposed as part of the consultation we consult on increasing the percentages for Band D to Band 5. And I think that's what you were referring to.
But does that include the modelling that Zoe mentioned, or is that's something separate, isn't it? If you're going to, sorry, you said your model on the basis of changing those things, so that's new, isn't that? That's not what was planned originally.
We would always model. I think so. We're always on tight timescales because we will need this to go to cabinet with our design scheme by around December. So we've got to go out to consult for 8 weeks. So we can probably get some basic figures ready for the beginning of August to start the consultation. But when we came back with the results of what people have said, we can come back with a full picture of costings for you then. So when you make a decision on the scheme that has to go to full council, it's a full council decision on where the changes to the scheme are made. Then you can decide, and we would have a lot more information for that report. There'll be a full equalities impact assessment, and lots of information would come back with it.
Okay, in that case, do we have a seconder for the recommendation in the report? To Councillor Conrad, sorry, you're right in my blind spot. And those agreed? Wait, was that 2 over there? Agreed. Abstain and object. But the motion is passed. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, committee, for all your comments so far, and thank you to officers also. Moving on to item 12, the medium-term financial strategy, and we are back to Councillor Cox.
So I apologise, it's me. As again, I think this is the one committee, sort of like where we are in the cycle, that we just cover all the financial papers. So thank you for bearing with me. The council's MTFS sets out in financial terms how the council will deliver its strategic priorities. The report describes the issues and risks involved in preparing the MTFS for the next 5 years and sets out a proposed timetable. Yeah, so you're asked to note the issues and the risks, and also approve the proposed timetable and approach. This year's update of the MTFS is dominated by 2 significant and new factors. Number 1, the local authority funding review reforms. You'll have heard about the fair funding review. And secondly, local government reorganisation, and you've all heard about that, obviously. The first of these will mean a reduction in funding for district councils such as Maidstone, although the exact amount and the timing remains unclear. We did hear last week that the funding review will actually be based over, the settlement will be based over a 3-year period. So that's helpful. Up until now, it's been set on a year-by-year basis, so it made it really difficult to look forward. And local government reorganisation means that we may only be planning for 2 years, 26, 27, 27, 28. What we're going to propose in terms of the budget setting is unusually we set a 2-year budget in this, for the next 2 financial years to align with what we expect under local government reorganisation, but also to take that forward look on what our outer year financials are likely to be, given what we've said about reduction in central government funding. Our external auditors, Grant Thornton, nevertheless advise that we should continue to plan ahead as normal, despite of local government review. So even though we think, that's coming around the corner at us and maybe all will be well, we actually have to plan as if it doesn't happen, and all of our numbers need to be sort of like set on that basis. Their advice is attached as an appendix to the report. As usual, projections will be prepared on a range of different scenarios, depending on how funding reform and local government reorganisation are delivered. And the table on page 53 sets out the possible scenarios. The council needs to be prepared for the most adverse scenario, i.e. scenario 4, which you'll remember was the scenario that we adopted last year as well, again, or in the current financial year, I should say, because of uncertainty. And so on that scenario floor, we'd be making our plans accordingly. Officers will therefore consider how a potential 10% reduction in resources could be managed, while retaining the flexibility should savings not be required urgently. So officers have been asked by Mark Green, who can talk further about this and any other part of this paper, to actually consider the scenarios that might deliver that 10% resource cost saving. So, as I said, you're recommended to propose to Cabinet that it notes the issues and risks associated with updating the medium-term financial strategy and approves the proposed approach and timetable for the development of the MTFS in the context of the overall budget setting process. Thank you.
Councillor Harper has indicated he wishes to speak. Does anyone else, before we go back to Cabinet members? No, just Councillor Harper, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of those present tonight, only Clive and myself, and I think Mark might have been here, and we can remember back to 2016-17, the year when that revenue support grant finally vanished for Maidstone. And if you like, ever since then, we've been having to stand on our own 2 feet, as the report says, relying on the income from various services and properties we've got from the council tax, and obviously our proportion of the business rates. I mean, it's obviously, and I fully agree with the idea of doing a 2-year budget. I think given what we're facing, which is fairly well spelled out here, we're obviously going to have challenges in the next year, so 2026, 27, but clearly more so in 27, 28. And so I think we need to look at the two together, because the danger of just always doing 1-year budgeting is that you go for easy cuts in year. Well, the implications may be the next year. So if we look at it over 2 years, we've got a much better idea. And it may be that, in some of the stuff in year 1, you might spend more on to actually get benefits for you in year 2 or whatever. But I think looking at a 2-year budgeting situation makes sense for us. We've got enough in our reserves. If there's a notional deficit on 1 year, that we can soak it up, as long as within the 2 years we're sort of going in the right direction. I think it's a real shame the government is, I think it's right that they reallocate resources or increase resources in poorer parts of the country. But, for the South East is not all as wealthy and as leafy as people may, or perhaps some people in Westminster may imagine. We have our own problems. We just discussed it, didn't we, in terms of helping the poor. So we're going to be hammered in terms of losing some of our business rates we can keep, which is going to be forcing us into a bad situation. The other thing, which I think is really sad to see, that we're going to lose the recovery grant, the new homes bonus, and doesn't sound all that jazzy, but the minimum funding guarantee funding floor, which I do remember discussions about that when that was brought in, because that £4 million a year is how we help fund what used to be the 1,000 affordable homes, but our council housing policy, in terms of putting that money aside so that when we get the housing revenue account, there's enough money to provide the relevant housing subsidy we need to put into it. And we've always assumed that the money from those grants would go into it, and now the government's pulling that from under us. So we will obviously have to now start thinking about, presumably, arrow towards his unallocated reserves balance to make good that, because the housing revenue account is due to come on track. Is it in the next sort of 12 to 18 months, and it's relatively soon. So significant decisions will be needing to be made on our reserves as part of this. So, as I say, the more I look at it and think about it, I think it's unfortunate we're in the situation we are. Nothing that we can control. 2-year budgeting, the right thing. The timetable you're suggesting, with as much discussion with everybody in the council, would seem to me the best way we can go. You know, so I'm quite happy to move whatever page it's on. Recommendations on page 45. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the first one is that we note the issues and risks associated with the medium-term financial strategy, and we approve the approach and timetable. And should we not have in there about a 2-year budget, sort of explicit, or is it? You know, I'm just thinking in terms of recommending to the cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. Just in response to the point about the 2-year budget, under the Constitution, we do just set an annual budget, but we do a 5-year medium-term financial strategy. So the year 2 of the medium-term financial strategy, we can make as solid as possible in putting forward proposals to council in February.
Okay, well, we'll just stick with the 2 recommendations we've got here to make it easier. So I move those.
Do I have a seconder, Councillor Conyard, and take that to a vote? Who is agreed? Agreed. Fantastic. In that case, I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much, everyone.